Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me is returning guest to the podcast, Chris Denmead. He's come back with a new book in a different genre than before. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi, Tim. How you been?
Well, it's been a tough start to the 2025. Um, Not for all the reasons everyone's having, but for a bunch of reasons personal to me. I mean, I lost my mom in December, and that's why the show's been on hiatus for another month in February. But we're back now, so.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. It was difficult for me to get past it, but the show must go on, I guess. I guess the meaning of that phrase keeps coming back to me. That sentence. Anyway, so Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to write this book?
In this book in particular, this came from me writing another book called The New England Horror Filmmakers, which is all about
Hmm.
independent filmmakers that made horror movies. I don't have the book in front of me to kind of go over, so I can't list any of them. But
That'll do. That's fine.
this book came from that, and it was inspired by just me visiting comic book stores throughout the country, anywhere I went, or in New England itself.
Hmm.
And I wanted to write a book about comic book stores in New England. I'd always had an idea to do this. There is a book that came out called My Comic Shop. I believe is the title of it. I can actually get the correct title up in 2 seconds when I get my Audible open. And after reading that, that gave me a lot of inspiration to finish my previous biography documentary book and then
Hmm.
do this one as well. Um, let's see, what was the name of that book? It's called Comic Shop by Dan Gerino, and it's all a look at the comic book stores of America. And
Wow. Huge
he
scope
talks
there.
about,
Yeah.
well, he doesn't interview every single store in America because that's impossible,
Okay.
but
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't work.
he does talk about the history of comic book stores and where they come from, and that gave me the
Hmm.
inspiration to write this book.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, I love the concept of something so focused and yet so, I mean, expand. There's so much to talk about, really. I mean, I don't know a whole ton about honestly comic book shops. I've regularly gone into one. Right when I started reading comics, I'm about 10 years younger than you are, so I started reading them online when I got into it. Really, I mean, I started reading like manga and superhero comic books through digital media basically almost immediately when I started reading because it was just easier to get my hands on them.
We cover some stores that carry a lot more manga than your typical store, but
Mm.
it's it's few and far between. But there are a couple stores that are heavy on the manga more than the actual American comics.
Yeah, the history of manga and American comics is really fascinating, though, and I just really like. I mean, because it's one of those things where people will say, "Well, I mean, like I'll talk to my friend Reinhardt, and he'll say, it seems like American comics aren't the same as they used to be." He's a huge comic book fan from. He's probably about your age. He was a huge comic book fan from like the 80s and 90s, and then he's gotten kind of burnt out on them, right? And I, on the other hand, I'm like I've never been 100% invested in the concept of the superhero, so Western comics aren't always my cup of tea, but I do love a lot of them. So I guess my point is there's a lot of room to because these comic book shops also have a ton of depth to them, right? They're not a lot of they sell things other than comic books as well, and so there's a lot of room for variety in the sort of stores they are. And therefore their owners could be even more vast array of people. I think
There's
that's
only
really
a couple.
cool.
There's only a couple stores that are strictly comic books. There are a
Hmm.
few stores that I'm sorry. There are a few stores. So I interviewed 32 stores in the book. I can't speak for every single store in New England, and I'm not going to. But the 32 stores that I interviewed, the ones I would say about over half of them are doing other things, but there are
Hmm.
a large number of the stores in the book that are strictly comic books. Either it's comic books, if it's
Okay.
graphic novels, if it's comic book related toys, then that's fine. But no, they do not start dealing in games and Yu-Gi-Oh cards and Pokemon cards and Magic the Gathering cards or anything like that or vinyl records.
Huh.
It's comic books and comic book related action figures and statues. That's it. But there are
Wow. So
stores
that's
that did need to there are stores that did need to explode more into other avenues and became
Hmm.
like half of a gaming store and part a comic book store, or some that completely gave up comics and became a complete gaming store.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that particular example because, like, in where I live in the Midwest, I mean, we split up. It seems like in most of the stores are split up. They started out being a hybrid. In a lot of cases, the places I got my first like Warhammer stuff were hybrid comic book game stores, and now those same stores exist, but they've split up into even the store with the same name is one of them sells comics and the second one sells miniatures, and it's just a totally different vibe, right? Because the places have become a little more segregated in that way.
Mm-hmm. Or some stores buy out an old gaming store, or old comic book store, and they have their comic
Yeah.
book stock, and they start getting into comics, so they find out that it's not something for them. Um, there were stores that I was going to interview that I knew were comic book stores, but they
Mm,
stopped me. Not that they wouldn't appreciate the promotion, but unfortunately, they're no longer dealing in comics, and comics are sitting in like a back corner of their store, and it's just stuff that they had
mm,
left over in their stock. And most of their store now is board games and magic cards and anything particular related to those kind of things, which is fine because they found the comic book industry to not be something that they can sustain them financially.
right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting too because comics are one of those like nerd kind of hobby things that's even more story focused than most of the other forms of like Magic or Warhammer or board games, which most of that stuff has some kind of story behind it in the fictional sense. But then comics are mostly story, right? If you think about it in those terms, they are story books generally. Um, to put it in a crass term, I guess, it's to make it sound like they're for kids, which they're generally not these days. It seems like, but obviously there's variety too. So anyway, so you delved into this whole scene of the New England. Are you from New England? I guess I think that'd be a good place to start. How'd you come to thinking about this particular part of the country? I guess.
I live in Massachusetts.
Okay, Massachusetts makes sense. Uh, so I think it makes sense to go from there. If you're still with me, Chris,
Yep,
to ask if you I mean, because obviously you've written comic books as well, right? Am I correct in saying that? I think we've interviewed you before about your graphic novel, right?
the last time I was on, it was about my comics and my graphic novel. Correct.
Absolutely. Okay. Just it's been some time. The years make my mind cloudy, of course. So when it comes to writing, not only nonfiction but prose, how does that process differ for you? Is it vastly different writing nonfiction over, um, any fictional comic books?
Um, Yeah, I mean this book is all research, so I can't
Hmm.
speak for all nonfiction writers. I'm not going
Sure.
to, but most nonfiction is going to be um, classified under research, just because
Hmm.
unless you're writing um, some kind of educational journal based on the
Or
fact that
maybe
you have a
personal
master's degree,
essays. Yeah.
uh, or even that's probably still research.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
these biography books, documentary books, they're all, I guess, research educational books in general. It was just a matter
Hmm.
of making sure I interview people that had a story to tell. I had interviews with people that just couldn't talk or didn't have
Yeah.
anything interesting to say about their store, or were quite boring, or they were just not interested in being interviewed because they didn't like reporters.
Mm.
Multiple reasons. Those were just some of the highlights. But most everyone in the book usually had some story to tell about why they opened their store and how they keep their store going.
Ah, makes sense. I mean, it's a big thing. Owning a whole or operating an entire establishment like that, it's got to be a big deal. Did you, I mean, as part of someone's life, I've never done it, right? The only storefronts I've ever used are things like Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and those are websites, right? The ones I use. So I guess the physical locations. Did you actually go to these places to learn about them more?
Most of them, the only ones I didn't visit were in Vermont,
Hmm.
and Maine. Everything else I did visit for the most part. Um, Vermont's a little harder to get to. We're talking about almost a 3 to 4 hour drive, and some parts of Maine are the same way. One of the stores in Vermont, I had to reach out to the local newspaper because they ran an article about the store. The store's owner passed away this past May. She was unable to be reached prior to that several times, and the newspaper allowed me to use their article as long as I printed. Obviously, if I use the reporters, as long as I use the reporter's name and mentioned the newspaper,
Hmm.
they were fine. As just like it came from this. The other one I did myself, like the way we're doing it here.
Ah, okay. So you do a lot of sit down interview type stuff in general with these people,
Either
these
in
store
person
owners.
or over the same way that we're speaking, correct?
All
Never,
right, that
not
makes
over the
sense.
phone because I just didn't. I needed to record everything so I could write it all
Hmm.
down and then send it back to the person I interviewed to say I needed to kind of proofread this and make sure this is all factually information correct.
Yeah, yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, genuinely did reporting, which I mean, journalism. You did a journalism, Chris, and probably this. And it sounds like this is the second. This isn't your first nonfiction, so it's the second time you did this sort of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Plus, I have,
Um.
of course,
Go on.
I do this too. I mean, I
Okay.
have the
Of
radio. I
course.
have my radio show and podcast that I do just like this or whatever. Where I'm interviewing people, and the same people that like Mickey sends to me as well for authors
Hmm.
and things like that. So
Oh, cool. Yeah. So, what's your show called again? Your radio podcast or whatever.
the radio show I do is Radio of Horror. I have several podcasts,
Ah,
but we'll just
yes.
leave it as Radio of Horror.
Radio horror
For
and
yeah, and that's
adjacent
Sunday
projects.
night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's awesome. I've really been getting into horror lately. I was not a horror guy when we last talked. Honestly, I was not that big of a horror guy. I began my horror journey just a couple years ago, really, especially in film. So I mean, like, I always thought like horror is kind of cool, and I liked Alien, like that franchise, right? But uh, I didn't go much beyond that for a long time. So anyway, that's a tangent. We're going to be not wandering down that lane too far right now. As far as the New England comic book stores go, was there one that really stood out to you, or they? I mean, there sounds like there's a large number of them that are really fascinating. And obviously, people are going to
Um,
want to check out the book. I just, especially if they're in our kind of neck of the woods as far as, I guess, interests, right? You know, comics, fiction, that kind of thing.
the book is really for people who are interested in the retail store industry of comic books.
Oh,
It's
okay,
also like a business journal as well, so people who are interested in how small
interesting.
businesses run their business, how small business owners conduct their business, rather to
Yeah.
say. That's really what the target audience is for. But of
Okay.
course, comic book fans who live in the area that might want to know about how that's entertainment or Double Midnight Comics or Raygun Comics or Nick's comic strip, these
Hmm.
stores throughout the 6 states, um, conduct themselves and keep their business going in light of tumultuous situations that have arisen over the last 30 years, the rise and fall of the comic book industry a couple times, and now currently Diamond Comics, which I'm not going to get into very much because I don't want to speak for Diamond, but your listeners can look up online that, of course, Diamond Comics distribution, the biggest distributor in the on the planet, went bankrupt this past January, and they didn't just
Oh,
go
wow.
bankrupt bad a little bit; they went bankrupt badly, and they are in
Hmm.
serious trouble. And like I said, a lot of that's on the internet to read about, but that just happened just before we were going to go to publishing. So I snuck that in there just to make it relevant to 2025. But obviously,
Wow.
all the stores that I interview, with the exceptions of the ones opened within the last 3 or 4 years, had to deal with COVID and how they dealt with that. And large reason why Diamond is in trouble is because of COVID. But there's at least two stores that I interviewed that are in the book that don't exist anymore already.
Wow. So you've got your book's almost becoming partially a business history as well. Yeah.
For
Heavy
New
on the
England, just for New
for
England,
New England, of
yes.
course, but it's specific, but it's
Yeah,
you know,
I don't want to.
yeah,
I don't like I said. I don't want to speak for the whole country.
of
That's why I
course.
referenced the other book, just because that's a really big Wall Street Journal style look at the comic
Yeah,
book
an
store retail
expansive.
industry.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned that this is small businesses can how in a business journal. Honestly, I'm not that no well versed in the the language there, but a small business journal. What exactly would you call that? I mean, or a business journal?
Just an FYI, and for anyone
Yeah.
listening, this is like, I am not a finance or business expert.
Okay. Okay. Good to
So
know.
just so everyone is clear, anything I talk about, I am not giving advice. I just call it a small business journal just because it's looking into the lives of people
Mm.
like you and me who might go to a 9 to 5 job, but they also own a comic book store, or their comic book store
Okay.
has become their 9 to 5 job. Because a lot of these people have mentioned to me that you cannot own this store and have a full-time job on the side. Your
Right.
wife or husband or partner, whatever the lingo is based on who you are,
Mm-hmm.
can have that, but you yourself need to dedicate your life to this store. And that's one
Okay.
thing a lot of these store owners repeat in this.
Wow.
So it's really a look at like, I own a business, I'm a small business owner. There's nothing else that matters in my life besides if I have any family, them. And even
Wow.
that,
So it's
that's a
that consuming.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
It has to be. I mean, it's a small business.
I guess it
There's
makes
no
sense. I mean, I've treated my writing career like that, and I mean, I don't even make money from that right now. So the podcast is for me more of a hobby. Honestly, it's more it fills that position, right? It's the second or third job, depending on my situation with writing at the time.
right. Not a
But
lot of people it is.
yeah, but I do think it's interesting that you say that it's that it takes that much effort. I mean, you wouldn't. I don't always think about it in those terms, but it does make sense. You're dedicating so many resources, so much time and energy to these places and these stores and stuff. It just I don't know. I'm not sure how I can express it, but it kind of boggles my mind thinking about the number of people who've dedicated their lives to that kind of thing. To any business like this, it seems it almost baffles me. Except, of course, that people like what the things they like, and they like them to a great extent. They love this stuff, right? There must be some passion in there that drives people like this to you know maintain their business despite all the difficulties.
Um, I once upon a time thought about owning my own small business, but as
Mm,
of late, I wouldn't want to do that. Massachusetts is not the best place to try and open a
mm,
business. That is not like, oh, I'm speaking out of turn. This is a lot of small business owners will tell you that opening a business here
okay,
in the state is really hard. I have not researched into why. I'm assuming it's like government taxes, legislation, a whole bunch of
mm,
things that are not in my book. We don't get into like, oh, it was hard for me to do this, because it just becomes like a
right,
big like, I hate the government kind of book, and I didn't want it to turn into like, oh, I hate the government because of X, Y, and Z. And by the way,
yeah. It doesn't
government, I
have to
mean
be
local
political
government.
screed. Yeah,
I don't want it to be political. I did not want to get into that. If they had something to say about Marvel, Diamond, DC, sure, that's fine.
sure, yeah,
That's their opinion about why Marvel, Diamond, DC are causing them headaches and problems. But
yeah.
I didn't want to get, that was enough politics for me, because otherwise the book would just get into a big like, well, this governor makes these tax laws, and it became really difficult to
Yeah, no, no,
become this
don't
kind
worry
of
about
person.
that. I mean, I'm starting to think though that I did raise you're raising one question for me. Is it are any of these stores divided by which company, which of the big two that they
No,
provide from, or are they all pretty much split up between those two?
I mean, there's one store in
They separate.
particular, and I won't reveal what it is because I don't remember if I put it in the book. He has
Hmm.
said to me multiple times that he absolutely hates DC Comics, and he will no longer carry new DC comic books.
Wow,
Anything old is fine, but he will not carry any new DC comics.
that's interesting. So there must have been some sort of event or transition that DC went through that made this owner dislike them or
Yes,
decide not to carry them anymore.
DC Comics left Diamond distribution for Lunar distribution
Ah,
during the
okay.
pandemic.
Wow. Okay. Now I'm starting to see kind of how this diamond situation got diamond or diamond. Is
What
it
was the
diamond
question?
or diamond with a D at the end?
Diamond.
Diamond. Okay. So this whole situation, though, I can start to see how that started falling apart for that company, though. Just in general. I mean,
DC
if
Comics
you've got
leaving
one of your
Diamond
big,
was one of the
yeah.
big was a big nail in their coffin.
So did you do any research in this book into distribution of comics like that, like
No.
printing or anything? Okay, just checking because it is interesting to me that if one of the biggest producers and distributors is like loses probably a half to two-thirds of their business depending on the situation
It's
right now, somewhere around that range.
that wasn't what the book was going to be about, and I didn't
I'm
want to
just I
cover
just
it.
thought that sounds like a disaster. So never mind. Never mind. Let's get back to the book. I think I think it does sound really interesting though. So these people, how old is the oldest store you went to? I suppose.
The oldest store in the United States of America is in my book. It's called Millionaire Picnic. They opened it up in 1974.
Wow. Okay. That's not quite as old as I thought it would be, but that's the oldest one that's still going. So that's still pretty. By this standards, 50 years, 49 years,
Nobody knows
whatever.
what the first comic book store was that opened because there's a lot of like drugstores and
Mm.
pharmacies and used bookstores and regular bookstores back in the
Ah,
70s
that
that
makes
called
sense.
themselves a comic book store. But Millionaire Picnic, as
March.
of most scholars
Oh.
or whoever has
Mm.
determined it, been able to find it, but they most people consider Millionaire Picnic in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to be the oldest comic book store because they opened in 1974 and they're on their
Wow.
fifth owner
That's
right now, Tony.
that's impressive, and they're right in your neck of the woods. Sounds like yeah. So at least Massachusetts is a pretty moderately sized state, at least, right? I'm not.
It's in
Never.
it's
I'm
in the
from the
Boston
Midwest.
it's in the Boston
Everything
area.
seems
I
okay. Okay.
live close enough to it. Yes.
Okay. Everything seems small to me out there. Like all the distances are smaller compared to out here. So I was like, I know you're talking about 6 states, like but they probably all fit in the space of, I mean, I don't know, maybe even Minnesota, but they have more people than Minnesota, probably each individually. So it's a crazy situation
No.
anyway. Yeah,
The six states of New England take up the entire northeast of the country above New York.
fair enough. But that area to me on the map looks tiny. I don't know, just saying. Um, but again, I don't peruse the map all the time. Not trying to diss your area or anything. I'm just saying it doesn't. It's a compressed zone, right? So especially given the number of borders involved. That's all I meant. So, Chris, when you went to start interviewing people, did you find it easy to get to talk to them? Or were
Yes.
most of them reserved? Or, yeah, you say yes. Okay, so
Yes.
who
Well,
do
no.
you.
Hold on. Yes and
Go on.
no.
Yes and no. Okay.
Okay.
Go on.
Yeah. Yes and no. No. Not everyone wanted to talk, and some people
Mm-hmm.
were just outright rude and unprofessional.
Mm.
A lot of people in the book, most people in the book were pretty nice. Some people I knew personally. Um, I knew just to kind of leave it to a couple stores that I actually visit very often. Paul Howley, who is the owner of That's Entertainment, which has been open for 45 years this coming April, and where this book will actually debut for sale. It's on Amazon right now, but I'm turning into like me being there for a signing is what I'm referring to. But I
Mm.
digress. Uh, I've known Paul since I was 16 years old, and I've been going to his store for a long time. And he was very easy to reach out to. We're friends on Facebook, and anytime I've had a question or comment, he's been able to respond pretty fast. So he was the first person I interviewed back during the pandemic because that's when I really started writing this thing down. Um, my friend John, um, who owns the Hall of Comics in Westboro, we went one cold March Saturday morning and had some coffee together, and he went over the history of the store with me. Unfortunately, this past July, John died of a heart attack,
Mm.
and he wasn't able to see his story be published. And the store is left in the care of his business partner Jake, so it is still open. But that that's the case of like a really easy person to reach, but they're unfortunately no longer with us due to just health concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's
And
a
anyone
lot of
else in the book
tragedy
that
involved here. Yeah.
well, yeah, and there's a woman named Amy who owns I think the store was called Legacy Heroes in
Mm-hmm.
comics. Her owner, the original owner for the store dropped dead of a heart attack in front of her. She bought the store out from under the family because they didn't know what to do with it. So they sold it to
Mm.
her. But COVID unfortunately put her in debt. She wasn't able to recover, and she
Mm.
closed the store 2 years ago. So she contacted me to let me know that she did close the store, but she's still interested in hearing about the book coming out.
Wow, difficult times indeed for New England comics. It sounds like. Um, yeah, that's the stories in your book though. Do they focus mostly on the business aspect? I guess they must, right?
They
But on the
will,
other
but they will
hand,
also
go on. Yeah, Go on.
They will, but they will also go into like, details about why did you want to open your
Hmm.
own store? Where did you
Okay.
work before? What were you doing before? One store owner who just got added at the last minute, Friar Tuck's Comics, he used to be the marketing rep for a lot of media companies for CDs and music in New England. And when he was done with that, he decided to open his own comic book store.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess, did you notice a diverse, really, how diverse, I guess, was the background of these people? I mean, we're talking about a relatively focused kind of business here, right? But,
I mean, Amy
yeah.
is the only woman I interviewed because she's the only
Okay.
female comic book store owner. Tony is the only African American comic book store owner. He
Hmm.
owns Millionaire Picnic. Otherwise, if you're talking about like diversity,
I mean, it could be
most
any
comic
kind
book
of
store,
diversity. It could be like what
well,
were they doing beforehand, that kind of thing as well. Is
they were working like blue collar jobs or they came from
okay.
comic books. So
Okay, so pretty consistent is for a lot of them, right? That's interesting in its own right because I wouldn't necessarily assume so, right? I mean, I know like in the game stores I go to because I frequent game stores more than comic book stores these days. The game stores I go to, there's a lot of veterans involved. So there's a lot of stories like that, that I keep hearing. It's either veterans or just uber nerds like me in the business in the gaming area. Is a
gotcha.
good chunk of us, yeah. Now, I kind of have a limited array. I've discovered during this conversation that I have a limited amount of knowledge of comic books and comic book stores in general, right, and of business in general. So probably this is not going to be the most deep interview in hindsight. I might have to put a disclaimer up front.
You read comic books yourself?
I've read them. I do not read a lot these days. I mean, I don't read a lot of anything these days. I've been very busy with my again, like I've said, this is my third job doing the podcast, kind of thing. So I'm very busy with just other stuff. But I do like some comics, right? I've read, but I mean, but I could tell you I don't own a ton of comics. Let me put it that way. I'm not a physical reader these days in general. I usually read digitally. So even my print books, my prose books are mostly read in digital. So I find that it's just an interesting thing. But analog, it's beginning to draw me back, right? There's this passion for, the thing itself that I find really interesting. And for the places, specifically, I mean, like with the games, the games are the places, are the side of things where I really want the physical artifact, right? I'm not one of those guys who got into, say, Warhammer through video games. I got into it through miniatures. And so but it was the opposite for me in comics, right? So I'm much more hands off when it comes to comics. Though I
Well,
have gone to yeah.
Warhammer will, make a comeback if that Henry Cavill movie ever actually happens.
Oh yeah, if it does, right? I mean, Warhammer's actually been doing really well since the pandemic because so many people got locked inside, right? And the Warhammer
Oh,
YouTube blew up huge,
oh, that's good.
and there's a ton of hobby stuff going on in that field that's really interesting to me. But I don't.
Good.
Yeah, that's not really within our purview here, but it is my big hobby, right? Is war games and making models and stuff.
I
But
used to do that in high
yeah,
school. I haven't been
okay.
involved in it since high school, but comic books I've always stuck with.
So that's yeah, we're kind of again inverted there, right? Because I got into comics in high school and I read like Green Lantern. I was reading I forget which run that was. It was the one. It started with the part right after. Oh, geez, what was his name? This might have been when I got to college, but it was the one Green Lantern, one of the classic Green Lanterns, Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan came back after he'd been dead and turned into this evil character for a while, right? He'd been
He
turned into
became
this.
Parallax. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the villain in the movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I didn't see the movie. I didn't see any Green Lantern movie ever, and I'm going to pretend it never existed because I really like the comics. And
Yeah, don't watch the movie. It's terrible.
yeah, there's a reason at the end of Deadpool that he goes back and shoots Ryan Reynolds before he can become the Green Lantern. But I really did enjoy that run of comics, and I read the Authority. That was like, but I just read, and I've read a lot of Alan Moore comics too,
And the
and
Authority
graphic
is going to
novels.
be
Yeah.
turned into a movie with under James Gunn's DCU.
Oh my, wow, that's interesting. And
The
I have
engineer from the
opinions about
Authority,
how that should be made, obviously, because I read the entire thing. I'm pretty sure.
the
Yeah.
the Authority will be the Authority's engineer is in the trailer for Superman coming.
Oh, really?
But I
Okay.
don't know a lot about the Authority to get it too much into it. I've only
Okay.
read it one time, so my knowledge of it is lackluster at most. So I
It's
will
one of my
be doing a
favorites, but it's
brush up when.
so insane. It's so silly in so many ways and so much more
Well,
I
they're
guess.
reprinting the Authority comic books
Oh.
in their pocket-sized $10 uh, trade paperbacks that they've been releasing lately.
Okay.
They're collections of stories that are only $10. So
Hmm.
they did it for Hush and Watchmen and Superman Birthright, which is what James Gunn's basing his Superman on.
Okay.
Or not Birthright. I'm sorry, All Star Superman. Excuse me.
Sure.
And a bunch
Okay.
of others. They're all online. You can take a look at them. They're really
Yeah.
cool. But
I get that's
Authority is going to
great.
be the next wave coming out this September.
Oh, I didn't realize that was still a DC property. I knew it was part of the Wildstorm universe, so I was confused by who owned it. But
DC absorbed Wildstorm into them after
okay.
before the New 52.
Okay. Yeah, see I'm like I said, I've never read any New 52 DC. I read some Marvel on the when they did we're doing Ultimate Marvel. I read some of that. But I've been
Gotcha,
kind of out of it
gotcha.
for a long time. Like it's like I really liked. I mean, because like I actually my first comic book was probably the collection of Ultimate Iron Man. That was my first actual physical comics that I owned as a teenager, because I was a
Cool.
huge Orson Scott Card fan back then, and he wrote Ultimate Iron Man, the little mini series, and
Gotcha.
I thought it was brilliant. But and that's also why I was kind of an Iron Man fan before the movie even came out, the one with Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, so that's
Well,
why I was like, oh, I was excited for it then, you know, even though it was all tangential because I wasn't even a fan of that version of the character, right? Like I wasn't a fan of the mainstream comics Iron Man. I was a fan of Ultimate Iron Man, who was like a completely different guy. um, but whatever, you know, it still got me in there, and I really did enjoy some of the comic book movies up to a point. But yeah, I guess you might say that I have a mixed relationship with comic book universes, especially the big two. You know, I do really love comics as a medium, though, and I've read a bunch of manga as well. Obviously, I think the medium of comics is more interesting to me than any specific storyline that I've read in it. If that makes sense.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear that a lot from a lot of different people. But Tim, thank you so much for having me on the show again.
Yeah, thank you for being on. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope I didn't put my foot in my mouth too much.
That's
Tell people
that's
where
what I
they can
said.
find the book.
That's what editing's for.
That is what editing is for. Finger to nose. Hopefully, no one will even notice, but I'm sure they will because I'm a hack and slash guy, so they'll notice some cuts probably. Anyway, have a good one, Chris. Tell people where they can find the book and when it'll be out.
It's currently available through Ingram Sparks and the company that published it, Bear Manor Media.
Mm.
You can find it on Amazon, of course, as well. I will be at That's Entertainment on Free Comic Book Day in Worcester, Massachusetts, selling copies of this book as well as my other publications like Vlada, a Dracula Tale. But this is the big book that I'll be pushing to people who are fans of That's Entertainment and more. So it's the New England Comic Book Store owners, and like I said, it's available on all of those sites that I mentioned. Or you can ask your local bookstore or comic book store to order it. They just have to make sure they go through Ingram Sparks, which is the distributor for the publisher Bear Banner Media.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. I'll try to make sure I remember to put the links in. I will make the link. If you send me the links, I'll put them in. That's how it works. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. You can find more of this podcast on the Libsyn feed because my website's still malfunctioning and I haven't had time to fix it. But you can find me at timniederwriter.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a good week. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.